The daughter was taken to hospital. The police came and saw the room. I was speechless. "Mom, I'm pregnant," my 14-year-old daughter Catherine choked out, her voice trembling. She looked so frail and distraught. I could only imagine the anguish and tears it took for her to utter those words. There was no trace left of the once bright and lively Catherine. Her words were hard for me to believe, but when she handed me the positive pregnancy test, there was no room left for doubt. Wanting to understand more about Catherine's pregnancy, I tried to gently probe further. "It must have been so hard dealing with this alone. Thank you for telling me. When did you take this test?" "I'm sorry, Mom, I'm so sorry," she cried. "Did you buy the test yourself? And who is the father?" If she was pregnant, there had to be someone responsible. I knew I shouldn't ask too many questions, but I needed to grasp the situation to take the right actions. Yet, no matter how much I called out to her, Catherine just kept muttering apologies, as if she was too confused or scared of something. The next day, I consulted with my husband, Jonathan. Naturally kind and very sensitive, he became distraught over Catherine's pregnancy. Despite our worries, the three of us headed to the nearest train station to go to the obstetrician together. But on the platform, I realized I had forgotten my insurance card. I left Jonathan and Catherine and rushed back home. After retrieving the card, I was hurrying out the door when our rarely used house phone rang. Sensing something ominous, I picked up the receiver, only to be notified that Jonathan and Catherine had been taken to the hospital. Not wanting to accept reality, I sped to the hospital searching for them, but they were nowhere to be found. A police officer at the hospital revealed the truth to me, leaving me in utter shock. I became consumed with a fierce desire for revenge against whoever subjected my precious family to such a terrible fate. Returning home, I gathered the people I wanted to talk to and confessed. Jonathan and Catherine, they committed double suicide by jumping in front of a train. My name is Angela. I'm 43 years old, originally from New York, and used to work sales at a major insurance company. But I quit when I got married and moved to the countryside, where Jonathan's hometown is located. We live with his parents because I fell in love with Jonathan's dedication to preserving the wonderful traditions of his parents' quilt shop and wanted to support him. The products sold at my in-laws' quilt shop were too precious to let fade away. While being smitten with Jonathan was a big reason, the strong appeal of the products his parents sold was also a major factor. "Sales have been in the red recently, right?" I asked. "Yes, it's a tough situation. It's probably just the changing times, but almost all the shops in the same business have closed down. Ours is practically the only quilt shop left around here," Jonathan sighed. For a while after moving to the countryside, I also worked at the quilt shop, handling sales. So even without asking about the revenue figures, I knew we were operating at a loss. Most of our business hours passed quietly with no customers. Sure, some of my in-laws' acquaintances would come to buy out of goodwill, but it was only those few patrons. It wasn't uncommon to have days without a single customer all day long. Even with no sales, it still costs money just to keep the store running. The craftsmen making the products here are my father-in-law, Jonathan, and a few others. The sales staff are my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and myself. We have the bare minimum number of employees, but with losses like this continuing, closing down is imminent at this rate. Every day will just be a slow decline, and I couldn't stand that. With my in-laws' permission, I fully utilized the skills I had cultivated working for the insurance company and started pitching to various stores. I took action, seeking out shops that would carry our products, while also considering the development of new merchandise suited to the times. Still a quilting novice, I first visited a couple who used to run a quilt shop that had ties with my in-laws to gain more knowledge. From there, I expanded my network, researching and gathering information on the types of quilts currently in demand. I've never seen quilt designs like this before, but Angela, you developed these designs together with a lot of different people, right? I asked. "I'll try discussing it with Dad and the other craftsmen," Jonathan said. "Thanks. I just hope this helps boost our sales even a little." Thanks to the new products we painstakingly developed with various people, customer traffic started to pick up, albeit slowly at first, I replied. After that, I no longer had the leeway to show my face at the shop due to my daughter's birth. But still wanting to contribute to sales, I began working on online sales. For over a decade, I devoted myself to releasing many new products, handling online sales, and securing partner shops to sell our merchandise. And finally, the quilt shop managed to overcome the crisis of going out of business. As the quilt shop's management got on track and Jonathan grew into a fine craftsman, our daughter, Catherine, entered middle school. Thinking about how she's at the age where she can act independently, her thinking has matured and she gradually needs less parental supervision, which makes me a bit lonely. But seeing Catherine smiling brightly every day, vigorously engaging in club activities, moving her body, and enjoying each day to the fullest filled me with more of a sense of heartwarming joy. About a year passed uneventfully, and then, around the time Catherine turned 14, she suddenly became withdrawn. At first, I thought it might be some kind of rebellious phase, but even now, she still obediently listens to what I say and what Jonathan says. And she doesn't seem to be avoiding us, so I figured there must be a different reason. "Catherine, did something happen recently? You don't seem very energetic," I asked. "It's nothing. I think I'm just a little tired from club activities. I'm going back to my room now," she replied. Even when we tried to make opportunities to talk, Catherine insisted she was just tired from being in a sports club. She started shutting herself in her room more, leaving Jonathan and me simply worried. After Catherine returned to her room, leaving just the two of us in the living room, I couldn't help but vent my concerns to Jonathan. "Why do you think she won't talk to us? Am I that unreliable?" I asked. "You're a wonderful mom from my perspective. I'm sure she'll talk to us when the time is right," he reassured me. "I wonder if something happened at school or maybe I'm just as worried as you. Let's be patient a little longer, Angela," he said gently. Encouraged by Jonathan's kind words, I resolved to take time to be there for Catherine. She must be feeling lonely during this sensitive time in her life. Maybe kids around her age find their parents annoying, but my feelings and love for Catherine won't change. Wanting her to sense that I did my best and simply continued to face Catherine and stay by her side. Weeks passed and Catherine still hadn't regained her usual cheer. She started frequently spacing out with an even more pained, stiff expression, desperately holding back. I desperately held back my urge to interfere out of excessive worry and went about my daily life. Then one night, "Mom," Catherine approached me in the living room after I had finished checking social media and packaging products for online sale. It was already late at night, a time when Catherine would normally be asleep in her room, but that day she came out to where I was. Maybe she was finally going to open up about what was troubling her. Thinking that, I shook off my sleepiness and had Catherine sit on the sofa for the time being. "What's the matter, Catherine? It's okay, you don't need to rush, just take your time and talk to me," I said softly. "Okay," she nodded. Catherine seemed to be struggling to find the right words, or perhaps she lacked the courage to speak. It felt like it had been a long time since I had looked at her face to face. Upon closer inspection, she lacked the vibrancy and vigor she once had, and her complexion was poor. She had been leaving a lot of her dinner uneaten lately, and I felt like she had gotten thinner. I was desperate to hear the rest of her story, but I held back, thinking that if I rushed her now, it would only corner Catherine when she had finally mustered the willingness to talk. After waiting for who knows how long, gently stroking Catherine's back, she finally opened her mouth, seeming heavy-hearted. "Mom, I'm pregnant," she said. "What?" I gasped. "I'm sorry," she whimpered with trembling hands. Catherine took out a pregnancy test showing a positive result. The reality of the situation turned my mind completely blank in an instant, but seeing Catherine apologizing profusely and shedding tears, I thought about how much she must have agonized and suffered up until this day, and my heart ached. "Oh, Catherine, it must have been so hard dealing with this all alone," I said gently. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she repeated. "So, do you have any idea who the father might be if you're saying you're pregnant?" I probed, but all I got in response were sobs and apologies. Even though I knew I shouldn't rush her, it would be difficult to come up with a plan going forward without knowing the facts. I tried asking every question I could think of, but Catherine just trembled. "I'm sorry, Mom. Please forgive me. Please don't hate me," she pleaded. "It's okay, Catherine. I could never hate you," I reassured her. Catherine seemed to be on the verge of being crushed by the gravity of what she had done, hyperventilating and no longer in a state to provide details. Thinking it was already late and wanting her to calm down by sleeping, I soothed the lightly panicking Catherine and decided to have her explain more at the hospital tomorrow. The next day, I woke up earlier than usual and roused Jonathan. "What's going on? Why so early in the morning?" he asked groggily. "I'm sorry for the early hour, but there's something important we need to discuss. It's about Catherine," I said. As soon as Jonathan realized it was about Catherine, he sat up immediately. "I need you to listen calmly. Catherine is pregnant. I only found out from her late last night, and I don't know the details, but I began. "Pregnant? You're joking, right?" he said in disbelief. Jonathan's eyes widened, and his voice and lips quivered as he squeezed out the words. He seemed to be saying this couldn't possibly be happening to our child. I felt the same way. I think she had been agonizing over this a lot. After she told me, she just kept apologizing while hyperventilating. "You've seen how she's been lately, right?" I asked. "Yes," he nodded. I had been intensely shaken when Catherine told me too, and it felt like a whirlwind of emotions was about to explode within me. But Jonathan seemed to be even more visibly shocked. I could tell he was desperately trying to listen, but he was flustered. Jonathan has always been kind-hearted and sensitive by nature. He might not express it in words, but he was probably imagining Catherine's feelings and taking on the damage as if it were his own. And as a father, he was likely shocked that his young daughter was pregnant. "Until she explains the details at the hospital, let's not say anything that might upset Catherine. We're planning to go to the OB/GYN in the next town over today, so please come with us," I requested. "Okay," he agreed. I thought I couldn't hide the truth, so I told him. But seeing Jonathan's agitation and haggard appearance firsthand made me regret having said anything. But I knew I was doing the right thing. Jonathan must be desperately trying to process the reality of the situation too. If that was the case, I had to be the one to take strong, purposeful action. I called my in-laws and told them Catherine had suddenly fallen ill, getting permission for Jonathan and me to take the day off. When Catherine woke up, I tried asking about the circumstances of her pregnancy again, but couldn't obtain any key information. Thinking maybe it was hard for her to talk about in front of her father, I simply gave Catherine a gentle hug without saying anything, realizing our departure time was approaching. The three of us left the house together. We took a taxi to the nearest train station. When we reached the platform, I noticed I had forgotten something crucial. "Oh no, I think I forgot my insurance card," I exclaimed. "Should I go back and get it then?" Jonathan offered. "No, you and Catherine wait here. I'll quickly go retrieve it and come right back," I insisted. I could have let Jonathan handle it, but I had a bad feeling about letting Jonathan walk alone when he couldn't hide how drained he was after hearing about Catherine. He might get distracted by his thoughts and become careless, and I couldn't make the already pale and sickly-looking Catherine walk around unnecessarily. So I left the two of them on the station platform and returned home. Our house is a bit of a distance from the nearest station. If there had been a taxi outside the station, I could have taken it, but of course there wasn't a single car around at a time like this. I decided to sprint home at full speed. I wanted to get Catherine to the obstetrician as soon as possible. As I ran, gasping for breath, I berated myself harshly for forgetting something so important. Arriving home, I put the insurance card in my wallet and was about to leave when suddenly our rarely used house phone rang. I could have ignored it and rushed to the station, but I had a feeling I needed to answer that call. I took off my shoes, hurried into the living room, and picked up the phone. The caller was a nurse from the biggest hospital in this area. In a matter-of-fact tone, she conveyed the shocking news that Jonathan and Catherine had been taken to the hospital. Perhaps the hospital was busy because she wouldn't tell me anything more, just insisting that I come to the hospital right away. My mind went blank as I called a taxi and headed for the hospital. On the way, the taxi driver mentioned that a train had stopped running due to someone jumping in front of it. I broke out in a cold sweat, wondering if the ones who had leaped onto the tracks in the path of the oncoming train could be Jonathan and Catherine. The image of a dejected and unwell Catherine and a haggard Jonathan, who had been dealt a huge shock upon learning of his daughter's pregnancy, these two impulsively joining hands and jumping in front of an approaching train together, that scene played out vividly in my mind. I tried to tell myself that couldn't be the case, but once the worst-case scenario crossed my mind, it continued to smolder within me. Please let them be safe somehow, I prayed. Arriving at the hospital, I went through the emergency entrance to find many nurses and doctors rushing about in a flurry. Glancing a bit further in, I saw the surgery light glowing red. An ominous feeling churned in my chest, mocking my wish that my bad speculations were just needless worries. I couldn't very well talk to the nurses scurrying around busily, but as I stood there, at a loss for where to go, a police officer approached me. "Is something the matter?" he asked. "Actually," I began, as I explained the series of events that led me here. The officer nodded slightly in understanding. It seemed he had been waiting for me. He then opened his mouth to talk about what had happened on the station platform and about Jonathan and Catherine. "Brace yourself before you hear this. The truth is," he started. Shocked by the facts revealed, I left the hospital alone, burning with a desire for revenge, and returned home to report today's events to my in-laws. I had them gather in the living room after closing up the shop. "I'm sorry, Father and Mother. Thank you for coming together too, Sister," I addressed them. "What on earth happened? We heard Catherine was in poor health and were so worried," my father-in-law said. "Did something happen to Catherine?" my mother-in-law fretted. Despite my in-law's concern, my sister-in-law wore a bored expression, examining her nails. My anger surged even more at her reaction, but I had to endure just a little longer. I would expose her true nature. "Catherine is pregnant, and today, on the way to the OB/GYN with the family, she jumped in front of a train with my husband in a double suicide attempt," I began. My in-laws were at a loss for words upon hearing my explanation. It was only natural. The content was far too shocking, so of course they would be tongue-tied. But my sister-in-law's reaction was different. The moment she heard it, she started trembling, looking flustered. Her response was so exactly as I had anticipated that I almost burst out laughing, but I held it back. As my sister-in-law turned pale and began to shake, my in-laws tried to calm her down and soothe her, but she shook them off. "It's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. I never thought they'd do something like jumping in front of a train," she shouted as she rushed out of the living room. My in-laws seemed to have no idea what was going on. Their eyes were wide. They just stared at my sister-in-law running away. "Ah!" she screamed. "Huh? What's going on?" my mother-in-law exclaimed. "What happened?" my father-in-law shouted. A loud shriek was heard, and both my in-laws stood up and headed out of the living room. There they found my sister-in-law collapsed on the ground, her legs giving out, and standing in front of her were Jonathan and Catherine, shooting her a look of utter contempt. "How dare you treat my precious daughter so cruelly?" Jonathan seethed. "That's horrible. I trusted you," Catherine cried. "I've already consulted with the police to take appropriate measures. You will have to take responsibility for what you've done," Jonathan declared. My in-laws looked at me as if they had no idea what was happening. I apologized for telling a lie that left them confused, even if it was to expose my sister-in-law's misdeeds. Then I told them the truth. When I arrived at the hospital, the police officer informed me that Jonathan and Catherine had fallen down the stairs on the station platform. According to an eyewitness account, Jonathan had tried to support Catherine when she stumbled in front of the stairs, but they ended up falling. A passerby who witnessed the accident called an ambulance and also notified the police, so they were taken to the hospital within just a few minutes of the accident occurring. While both Jonathan and Catherine had bruises all over their bodies, their lives were not in danger, and they didn't need to be hospitalized. I breathed a sigh of relief. The officer who came in response to the report was very kind. Despite the accident procedures already being finished, he waited for me, a family member, to arrive in the emergency ward of the hospital. "You mentioned that your daughter is pregnant, but with a fall like that, there's a possibility she could have a miscarriage," he said. "No," I gasped. "I think they're in the middle of examining her now. I'll guide you, so please come this way," he offered. As I was led to the back of the emergency ward, I saw Jonathan and Catherine sitting on chairs in the hallway and ran over to them. "Catherine, Jonathan, thank goodness!" I cried. "Angela, I'm sorry for worrying you," Jonathan apologized. "Sorry, Mom," Catherine said. I hugged them both, and of course they had body heat and responded to my questions. That alone brought tears to my eyes. Jonathan had bandages wrapped around his arms and head, but Catherine seemed unharmed. Feeling relieved by that, I suddenly remembered my conversation with the police officer earlier. Experiencing pregnancy and miscarriage at this age was too cruel. "By the way, what about the examination?" I asked. "Oh, about that, I wasn't pregnant," Catherine revealed. "What?" I was shocked. Catherine had been worried about her period being late, but according to the doctor, it could be related to her age, causing instability, lack of sleep, and stress. Her eating habits had also been irregular lately, so that was likely a factor too. "But the pregnancy test was positive," I said. "The doctor was puzzled about that too," Jonathan noted. "Catherine, where did you get that pregnancy test?" I asked. "It was from Auntie," Catherine started to explain, but then suddenly seemed to remember something and began to cry. I hurriedly took out a towel to wipe her tears, but they kept overflowing endlessly. Jonathan and I strived to understand the situation by carefully listening to Catherine's fragmented, halting explanation that kept getting choked up or jumping around. To summarize what we learned, Catherine had been troubled by her period stopping for about 2 months. She had never experienced that before and was feeling anxious. When my sister-in-law found out about it, "It's not normal for your period to be absent for 2 whole months, right? There's something wrong. It could be an illness or even a possibility of pregnancy," my sister-in-law said. "You're right, I'm worried," Catherine agreed. "Just to be safe, why don't you check with a pregnancy test?" "I have a few," my sister-in-law offered. "I haven't done anything that would get me pregnant, so it should be fine," Catherine insisted. "Well, it's just to be sure. It's only a little test," my sister-in-law pressured her. Unable to argue against my sister-in-law's forceful demeanor, Catherine reluctantly agreed to take the test. And somehow, the result was positive, despite not having done anything that would lead to pregnancy. Catherine was puzzled by this result and went to consult my sister-in-law. "I tried using the pregnancy test and it's positive, right?" Catherine asked. "What? No way. Getting pregnant at your age is way too messed up. Your life will be ruined. You won't even be able to go to school anymore, will you?" my sister-in-law said harshly. "But I haven't done anything that would get me pregnant," Catherine protested. "Huh? This result is everything you know. The accuracy of pregnancy tests, it's 99%. In other words, you are pregnant. What are you going to do now? You're going to cause trouble for us and your mom and dad, you know," my sister-in-law berated her. "No way. What should I do?" Catherine despaired. Even as Catherine insisted she had done nothing wrong, my sister-in-law asserted that the test result was absolute and lashed out at Catherine with a tremendously threatening attitude. Not knowing what to do and lightly panicking, Catherine sought help from my sister-in-law. But my sister-in-law just glared at Catherine as if looking at something dirty and shook her off. "Getting pregnant in middle school? What the heck were you thinking? That's so gross. I can't believe you could do something like that when you know nothing. You're way too promiscuous," she said disgustedly. "Huh? You can't even earn money on your own, so getting pregnant is unbelievable, you know. It's a serious crime. We worked so hard to get our shop back on its feet, and now because of the child you're carrying, things might get tough again and the shop could go under. If that happens, I'll never forgive you. Do something about it," my sister-in-law threatened. Rather than providing Catherine with information, my sister-in-law only fueled her anxiety, one-sidedly berating her before leaving. Left behind, Catherine didn't know what to do, and even though she wanted to talk to someone, she became too anxious for my sister-in-law's words to do anything. She thought her parents, who were absolute authorities to her, might say the same things as my sister-in-law, too. Scared to say anything, she had no choice but to keep it bottled up alone, unable to confide in friends either. Catherine continued to shoulder the heavy reality that she might be pregnant all by herself. It drained their energy from her, leading to a lack of sleep and even a loss of appetite. Catherine's fall on the station stairs was due to dizziness from lack of sleep and nutrition. By the time she finished talking, Catherine's face was a mess of tears and snot. It must have been too painful for a middle school child to bear alone. I hugged Catherine tightly. Jonathan, who had listened to the story, was also crying, and the three of us held each other there for a while. "Catherine, it must have been so hard. I'm sorry I couldn't notice and be there for you," I said. "Me too, I'm sorry," Jonathan added. "No, I could tell that you and Dad were always by my side," Catherine replied. Catherine's body was trembling. It seemed this incident had become a trauma for her, which was truly heartbreaking. I couldn't forgive my sister-in-law for putting my child through this. I told Jonathan and Catherine to come home once they had calmed down, and I left the hospital alone. My in-laws, who had heard the whole story, turned their gazes toward my sister-in-law, who was still sitting on the floor, their faces bright red. Cornered, my sister-in-law looked around as if searching for words. By the way, about that pregnancy test you gave to Catherine, wasn't that a dummy test? I did some research and found out there are fake pregnancy tests that always show a positive result. They're mainly sold online, but you knew that, right? I questioned her. I don't know. I don't know anything about that, she denied. Then you wouldn't mind showing us your purchase history, right? I pressed. Why should I have to show you what's on my phone? No way. I absolutely won't show you, she refused. If you don't know, there's no need to hide it, right? And you just said you never thought she would do something like that, didn't you? That's as good as admitting you did it, Jonathan shouted. I said I don't know, she insisted. As my sister-in-law tried to stand up and run away, my father-in-law restrained her and strongly demanded she show her purchase history. Unable to resist, she seemed to give up and threw her phone with the purchase history displayed toward me. I knew it, I said. The screen showed a purchase history for prank pregnancy tests. It was proof of what my sister-in-law had done. As if resigned to the fact that she had been caught, my sister-in-law confessed everything. That's right, I did it all. I couldn't stand you getting carried away in the first place, Angela. So when I found out about your daughter's irregular periods, I just thought I'd mess with her a little. It was only a joke. Why is everyone ganging up on me and complaining? She ranted. My sister-in-law's confession was completely self-centered. She resented how I had contributed to the quilt shop sales and turned the business around through my dedication, and how my business interactions had paid off, allowing me to become friends with the residents living around here, increasing my acquaintances. From her perspective, she couldn't stand me getting along better with them than she did. Unlike me, who was always proactively engaging with people, my sister-in-law was consistently passive. She has beautiful, well-defined features and is acknowledged as a great beauty by everyone, including herself. That's precisely why she took pride in her looks and believed that others should always make the first move. She was nice to those who did something for her, but her treatment of those who didn't do anything special for her was chilly. I think that's where the difference in our popularity originated. What the heck? Just because you have some sales skills, you get all high and mighty. I bet you just bowed your head to everyone, curried favor, and flattered them even though you're uglier than me, she spat. Hey, how dare you say that to Angela? Angela worked her butt off for our shop, sacrificing sleep to desperately come up with new products and pick out stores to pitch to. What were you doing that whole time? Jonathan defended me. Jonathan, that's enough. Just drop it, I interjected. I was furious at what my sister-in-law was saying, but this was in front of Catherine. I didn't want to show her a scene of us fighting with foul language. Perhaps realizing that Jonathan suppressed his anger and shifted his gaze to the front door. We called the police too, and we absolutely won't forgive you, he declared. There's no need to make such a big deal out of it. Can't you take a joke? This is unbelievable, my sister-in-law complained. My sister-in-law complained loudly as the police officer who had rushed over questioned her about the situation. This officer was different from the one at the hospital, but he seemed to have been briefed well enough to have a general grasp of the circumstances. Perhaps my sister-in-law was a bit intimidated by the officer, or maybe she figured it would be faster to be let go if she spoke frankly rather than poorly trying to hide things. But she readily confessed the facts. Her tone was very flippant. She kept insisting to the officer it was only meant to be a light-hearted joke and it was a gag, so she had no reason to apologize. Seeing my sister-in-law's behavior, my in-laws kept apologizing to me and Catherine. They weren't the ones at fault, but they wouldn't stop apologizing. Eventually, my sister-in-law seemed to be released and came back to us. I had a terrible experience. This is unbelievable, she grumbled. You little... Aren't you going to apologize to Catherine and Angela? My father-in-law demanded. That's right, you shameless woman. Do you have any idea how much you've hurt Catherine? My mother-in-law yelled. Huh? I keep telling you it was a joke. How many times do I have to say it before you understand? My sister-in-law said mockingly. In the end, we never heard a single word of apology from my sister-in-law. Jonathan, who had finished talking with the police, returned to my side with a frustrated look on his face. Judging from his expression, the outcome wasn't favorable. The police officer seemed frustrated too, but he said this case wasn't something they could arrest her for. He gave her a stern warning, but I don't think it sank in. He sighed. "I see you're right," I acknowledged. My sister-in-law, who got off with just a warning from the police, was complaining triumphantly. She seemed unconcerned about making enemies of my in-laws, Jonathan and Catherine. I had thought we could punish her a little, but in the end my revenge didn't work out, and I was left only to swallow my frustration. For the next few days, we tried to live in a way that would minimize Catherine's having to see my sister-in-law as much as possible, considering the burden on her heart. But I couldn't come to terms with the situation. My in-laws kept apologizing to me and Catherine as always, but they weren't the ones at fault in the first place. Why should they and we have to feel constrained despite having done nothing wrong? Moreover, my sister-in-law started harassing me in various ways at the shop. Fortunately, thanks to my mother-in-law's sharp glares, it didn't escalate into anything major, but it still made my resentment build up. Realizing I couldn't put Catherine's mind at ease here, I told Jonathan I wanted us to move out of his family's house and build a home for the three of us. We didn't have much in savings, since there was a time we weren't earning a proper salary when the quilt shop was struggling. I knew it would be tough, but to make it happen somehow, I threw myself into my work. A few months later, as we were gradually saving up funds, my sister-in-law suddenly and easily left home one day. The reason was apparently because she found her destined love. My in-law's anger exploded at her completely selfish reason. After repeatedly calling her, my sister-in-law finally answered, and my father-in-law told her, "You're disowned." A full year had already passed since my sister-in-law left. We had been considering moving out of my in-law's house, but with my sister-in-law suddenly disappearing, we were still living with them. The shop was thriving, and every day was packed with work. I had almost completely forgotten about my sister-in-law's existence. Then one night, the house phone rang. Wondering who it could be at this hour, I watched as my father-in-law, who was nearby, picked up the phone. He let out a big sigh and furrowed his brow. "What do you mean the house is gone? What's going on?" A familiar loud voice leaked out from the receiver. Hearing it, Jonathan and I looked at each other. We never dreamed my sister-in-law would call, but my father-in-law's demeanor was calm, as if he had known a call would come someday. "I sold the house a long time ago," he said. "What? I never heard about that. Tell me where you moved to," she demanded. "Why would I tell you? You're no longer someone who has anything to do with us," he replied. We had moved about half a year after my sister-in-law left. It was my in-laws who had proposed it. I had no idea about the deeper circumstances, but given my sister-in-law's personality, there was no way she could have a harmonious life with a man. My in-laws had anticipated that she would eventually be kicked out and come back in a bind. "What are you saying? What about the shop? You'll be in trouble if I don't take over for you, right?" she argued. "I haven't forgiven you for saying the quilt shop's work was outdated. I'd rather close the shop than have you take over the family business," my father-in-law shouted, angrier than I'd ever seen him. Like Jonathan, he was usually gentle, and I had rarely seen him get upset. For him to raise his voice this much was quite something. Still, I was surprised to hear she had called the quilt shop's work outdated in the past. Thinking about how my in-laws had forgiven and never abandoned such a daughter until now brought tears to my eyes. "I'll say it again. You're disowned. Don't ever show your face in front of us again," he declared. "Wait a minute. I'm in a tough spot right now. I need money. Come on, Dad, help me," she pleaded. Before my sister-in-law could finish talking, my father-in-law hung up and I couldn't hear any more of her words. I could tell she was trying to wear him down with tears at the end, but I wasn't sure what he thought. His back looked lonely as he put down the phone, and I couldn't bring myself to say anything. Jonathan gently patted my shoulder as I stood there, at a loss for words. Far from where the shop used to be, we had no way of knowing my sister-in-law's whereabouts, and were once again busy with our daily lives. A few months passed, and one day, while minding the store with my mother-in-law, some of my in-laws' acquaintances came from a distant place. They were people who had consistently bought our products, even when the shop was on the verge of closing down. They had been buying online for a while, but apparently they came to see us in person on a trip. And it was from them that we heard about my sister-in-law's current situation. When my sister-in-law found out the house was gone, she seemingly approached anyone and everyone in the neighborhood. Since it was a small area, her misdeeds were already known to all the residents. Far from lending her a hand, not a single person offered her a kind word. She was spending her days being gossiped about as a shameless woman who hurt a girl Catherine's age with an unethical joke and remained defiant even to the police. With no allies in that small community, even she must have felt constrained. As for my sister-in-law's partner, about whom we had no details, it turned out he was a man from the strip club she frequented. She had fallen head over heels for him, easily tricked by his flirtations. My sister-in-law, confident in her beauty, never doubted that he was in love with her. Furthermore, to make him crazy about her, she lavished him with large sums of money, even splurging all her savings. It seems that after leaving home, she barely worked, instead accumulating debt as she constantly went to the strip club. But such a lifestyle couldn't continue forever. Unable to repay her debts and no longer able to borrow money, she sought help from that man. However, he had no special feelings for my sister-in-law and was only dealing with her as a business transaction. While I have my doubts about his flirtations, I suppose it's karma. There was no way he would help a client who had racked up debt on her own, and my sister-in-law was promptly dumped. On top of struggling to repay her debts with nowhere to live, she was forced to live on the streets for a while. However, the residents, thinking it would be a problem if she suddenly turned up dead after being left on the streets indefinitely, apparently let her live in an abandoned house. And now, even in hardship, my sister-in-law still can't honestly work. Instead, she finds men who look wealthy and invites them to hotels, using the pregnancy tests that always show positive, the ones she had given to Catherine. She reports being pregnant to her numerous partners and demands marriage and child support payments. It's appalling that she's doing such things at this point, but it seems her scheme has yet to succeed. She's often seen returning to the abandoned house alone. Even in that area, my sister-in-law's bad reputation quickly spread. She became known as a terrible woman who threatened men with pregnancy and demanded marriage and child support, despite having a pretty face. Lately, it's even becoming difficult for her to bring men to hotels. Occasionally, even when she succeeds in luring a man, she ends up being taken advantage of instead, leaving her worse off. That's what the couple who came to the store told us. Having lost her home and unable to maintain the beauty she had absolute confidence in, my sister-in-law must be in quite a wretched state. Achieving revenge unexpectedly, I felt a little bit of catharsis. It's a shame I can't see it for myself, but I don't even have the time to spare to go see how she's doing now. She is a hopeless child, as always, causing trouble for everyone. It's a shame, my mother-in-law said, looking pained upon hearing about my sister-in-law's current situation. Despite having disowned her, she was naturally kind-hearted. She seemed concerned about the trouble being caused for the residents, but the couple who visited the store laughed, saying it made for good gossip. We chatted a bit more, and then they bought some new products and left. Incidentally, what prompted my in-laws to suggest moving was that I had casually mentioned how we were saving money to move out of my in-laws' house to avoid my sister-in-law. I had meant it as an offhand remark, but my in-laws offered to pitch in money to build a new house on a new plot of land. They had also been considering relocating to a more convenient location for a while and had been diligently saving up. Thanks to that, we were able to build a nicer house than anticipated, next to the house that doubles as a shop. An impressive factory was also built. All the craftsmen had fallen in love with my in-laws' character as they overcame difficult times, so they followed us to our new location. Recently, young apprentices who have been inspired by the quality of our products here have started joining us, wanting to learn the techniques. Our whole family has begun working together to pass on the tradition. The road ahead may still be long, but I feel a strong sense of fulfillment in this work. Ever since Catherine stopped the irregular lifestyle the doctor had mentioned, perhaps because she's free of stress, her menstrual cycle has returned to normal. She seems to be getting along well with the friends she made at her new school, too. Moreover, Catherine has recently developed a strong interest in fashion and has started thinking about whether she can make clothes and scarves with quilt-incorporated designs. Her design concepts, from a perspective we don't have, offer many discoveries. Every day is so packed with things to do that there's no time to rest, but I feel fulfilled. I want to make the shop even bigger and spread the appeal of quilts to more people. After experiencing the full journey of our story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How did the story resonate with you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay blessed. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.